Good evening, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today we are covering chapter 6, 7, and perhaps more of The Wealth of Nations. So, chapter 6, of the component part of the price of commodities. In society's early development, capital and land have yet to be acquired. As such, the proportion between labor quantities necessary for product acquisition is the only thing governing exchange. Suppose we look at a hunter society, where beavers are twice as rare and twice as difficult to kill than deer. In that case, a single beaver should be worth 2 deer. Within any culture, double the work is worth double the value. When the nature of the labor performed is more severe, additional value will be given due to the hardship. Consequently, 2 hours of mining coal may equal 4 hours of tilling fields. On the other hand, if a certain field of work requires uncommon skill and dexterity, men will give greater esteem to it and pay accordingly. Talents like this usually result from countless hours of training and study, so their superiority in pay may be thought of as compensation for this time investment. Advanced societies frequently make such allowances for skilled labor, and similar developments likely occurred at the dawn of civilization. Labor's whole produce belongs to the laborer, so the amount of time spent to acquire a given commodity is the only thing regulating its price. Once capital accumulates in particular hands, some will direct it to the industry. They will hire hard workers and supply them with tools and materials so they can profit. We see how the complete manufacturer of goods requires us to set prices above the wages and cost of materials. Otherwise they'd be running their business at a loss. Added value from the workers is resolved in this equation via 2 routes. One portion of revenue supplies the workmen's wages, and the rest flows to the investor as return on their capital, or what Adam Smith calls profit on stock. But I think capital returns is closer to what he meant. They didn't really have a stock market like we do today back then, so this book was written and was published in the same year as the American Revolution, 1776. Continuing on, unless investors can expect to generate more than it costs to employ workers, he would not hire them. Adam Smith conceptualized capital returns, or profits of stock as he called them, as payment for a certain type of labor, that of inspection and direction. However, capital returns are governed by different principles and are unrelated to the difficulty and quantity of the supposed labor of inspection and direction. Their regulation is wholly dependent on the employed stock's value, and any profits grow or shrink in proportion to this. Smith gives us an example. Suppose that in a particular market, manufacturing annual profits are 10%. In this market, 2 companies compete. Both directly employ 20 workers, paying them $15 a year, costing each factory $300 a year overall. One of them processes inexpensive coarse materials, such as raw iron, and spends $700 a year, while the other handles expensive materials and spends $7,000 a year. Let's say they do gold. At the first mill, annual capital requirements are only $1,000 total, and at the other they would need $7,300. If the returns are 10% at each of them, one will create a $100 profit and the other will generate a $730 profit, more than 7 times the first one's. Adam Smith tells us that despite having much different overall profits, the labor of inspection and direction performed by the investors may be nearly the same. Some large operations leave all this in the hands of one clerk. The mill's owner compensates the clerk in proportion to his labor and how much trust is placed in him, but it will not scale with the value under his management, unlike some of the wealth managers we have today. Yet the owner will expect his profits to be in proportion to his capital, even though he performs almost no labor. Therefore, in the pricing of commodities, the profits of stock are a separate component from that of labor and materials, and is subject to different principles. Since the market is shaped this way, laborers lack full possession of their labor's fruit. They share portions of it with the stock's owner, aka their employer. How much work it takes for a commodities generation does not regulate the price of labor entirely. Some part of the cash flow lands in the hands of the suppliers of capital, who furnishes the wages and material. Once a country's land has been fully divided into private property, landlords love to reap where they never sow, like all other men. Thus, they levy rents for the land's natural produce. Prior to this privatization, when all land was held in common, men only had to gather its resources, the wood, grass, and fruits. Now, the owners of land affix a price to what was once freely available. Whether you must buy a license to use the land or pay for its produce, everyone gives to the lord of the land a portion of their labor. And this constitutes the third component of commodity pricing. A commodity's overall price is thus measured by how much labor each of the added components commands. So labor measures the value of labor, rent, and profit altogether. All societies price everything according to one or more of these components, and in improved societies, they usually include all three. If we look at corn market dynamics, there is a stark example. One part of corn's price covers the landlord's rent, one pays for the worker and machine maintenance, and the final part goes to the farmer as his profit. When we combine these three parts, we arrive at the total price. Smith suggests conceptualizing a fourth part, which covers stock replaced and mechanical wear and tear. Yet one must not forget the price of the equipment is also composed of the same components: rent for the manufacturing facility, wages to the laborers, and profits for the owner. Complex manufactured goods stack chains of these pricing mechanics. To price bread, we must take into consideration the rent, labor, and profit for growing the wheat, the same three components for the one who mills the flour, and finally all three components again for the baker. Plus, there is the cost of transportation between each entity. Similar mechanics regulate pricing for all commodities. As more manufacturing is involved in the commodity's production, the wages and profit component begins to enlarge its share compared to rent. Increased manufacturing adds a greater number of profits, and every subsequent profit grows. Smith notes how this is the case due to increasing capital requirements. Advanced societies also contain a few commodities with only two price components, that of wages and profit. The cost of sea fish includes the fisherman's sustenance and capital gains for the fishery. Occasionally, a commodity pops up where pricing depends solely on labor costs. For example, some poor Scottish folk make a trade of Scottish pebbles. They freely gather the stones, selling them to a stonecutter without need for rent or profit. Nevertheless, all commodities resolve into one or more of these three basic components. Whatever remains after wages and rent are paid will be someone's profit. At the macro level, an entire country's GDP could be resolved into these three components: wage labor, capital gains, and land rent. Wages, profit, and rent are the three original sources of revenue. All other revenue is derivative of these. People who derive revenue from themselves do so from their labor, stock, or land. Labor revenue is called wages. Revenue from capital is profit, and if someone lends money to another and profits from it, that is called interest. Borrowers gain an opportunity to lever the lender's capital and compensates him for the chance. Some of the proceeds are rightfully the borrower's, as he assumes the risk and employs it on behalf of the lender. However, interest on money is always derivative of one of the other three components. It must come from another revenue stream. Revenue originating from land is called rent and belongs to the landlord. Farmers derive revenue partly from stock and partly from labor. Land is the chief instrument enabling him to earn a living from labor and stock. Taxes, salaries, pensions, and annuities are derived from one or more of the original three sources. If separate people control each of these revenue types, we can easily distinguish them. However, if one person controls them all, they are commonly confused. Estate owners should generate rent from the land and profit from the farmer, yet he will likely add these two together and call the total his profit, which confounds rent with profit in common language. Entry-level farmers avoid hiring managers to oversee general operations most of the time. Additionally, they tend to work the land with their own hand. After covering rent, whatever remains of the crop has to cover the cost of stock and also the wage for their labor. However, farmers refer to these leftovers as their profit, even though wages make up a large part of them. Chapter 7 of the Natural and Market Price of Commodities. Every society has an average rate of wages and profit, and they vary by the industry in question. Natural forces govern this rate, partly due to the society's circumstances and the particular nature of each employment. Similarly, every community has an ordinary rental rate, and this is also regulated by the circumstances of society and the location of the property. Smith calls these the natural rates of wages, profit, and rent, and he reminds us they are specific to the time and place where they occur. When a commodity's price is sufficient for the land's rent, the wages of production, and profit for the capital invested, then the commodity is sold for its natural price. In this case, whatever is being produced will be sold for its precise worth or how much it costs to bring to market. The prime cost, as said in common language, fails to calculate an entrepreneur's profit. If he sells at a price which does not adequately compensate him for a neighborhood's ordinary rate of profit, we may call him a loser by trade. Or, if he's selling at a loss. Had he employed his capital in a different venture, he might have made him profit. Profit is the lifeblood of the entrepreneur. It is what funds his sustenance. During the preparation of a product, he advances wages to the laborer, and he must advance to himself the reasonable profit from the sale of his goods. Unless he yields this much from his business operations, we may say running a business actually costs him. Adam warns us that although a dealer may price his goods lower than the natural rate, he is unlikely to run a loss for long, at least in a place with perfect liberty. Commodities are commonly sold at the market price, and this can be higher or lower than their natural price. Market prices are regulated by the ratio between supply and demand. Smith defines demand as the number of those willing to pay the whole rent, labor, and profit required for a commodity's production. These people may be referred to as the effectual demanders, and their demand as the effectual demand. Now, the effectual demand may be enough to bring something to market profitably, but it differs from the absolute demand. Absolute demand would include the demand of those without enough to pay for what is sold. For example, a poor man may be interested in buying a Mercedes, but he does not command the resources necessary to purchase one. When the supply of a commodity falls below the effectual demand, everyone who is willing to pay the whole value of rent, wages, and profit are unable to acquire what they desire. Consequently, there will be competition between them, and some will be happy to spend more. The degree to which prices raise above their natural price will correspond to the greatness of the shortfall or the wealth of the competitors. Wealthier people competing over more scarce resources will exert the greatest upward pressure on price. When competition occurs between people of equal wealth, the same supply deficiencies will generate more or less eager competition according to how important acquisition of the commodity is to them. Smith mentions this is responsible for the extraordinary price hikes seen on daily necessities during a town blockade or famine. When people are starving to death, they are willing to pay whatever price is demanded to feed themselves. On the other hand, when the amount brought to market exceeds the effectual demand, all of it cannot be sold at a price that covers the total value necessary to bring it to market. As a result, some portion of the product will be marketed at a reduced price, reducing the overall price as well, or the average price. Market prices sink below natural prices according to the greatness of excess, and to how important it is for the seller to offload his stock immediately. If the seller is willing to hold on to what he has, he may not have to lower prices that much. Perishable products will see a greater price reduction as a result if the sellers import excess compared to imperishable goods. You can hold on to a bunch of iron far longer than you can to a bushel of corn because the iron's not going to go bad. If we bring to market just enough to meet demand, no more and no less, the market price naturally settles nearer to the natural price. The whole stockpile will be disposed of at this price. Competition between dealers causes them to accept this price, but does not force the price any lower. Why does the quantity of all commodities suit the effectual demand? All those who employ labor, land, or capital benefit from this arrangement. If the amount exceeds demand, they must sell products at a loss, but if they fail to bring enough to market, they miss out on potential revenue. When product quantity rises above effectual demand, the component parts of its price must be paid below the natural rate. Landlords might receive less rent, and this will push them to look for other ways to put their property to use. If wages or profit are depressed, laborers and employers will both look for new avenues of employment. These changes will depress supplies until they are only sufficient to meet demand, and the components of price will adjust to meet their natural rates again. On the contrary, when the amount brought to market fails to meet demand, price components will increase above their natural rates. Higher rents will prompt landlords to employ more property to produce a particular commodity, and increasing wages or profit will attract additional labor and capital. As these forces act on the commodity's production, soon the amount produced will be enough to satisfy demand once more. Then each of the component parts of its price will fall to their natural rate, affecting the price as a whole. Therefore, commodities continually gravitate towards their natural prices, although different incidents may suspend them above or below this set point for a time. Regardless, natural forces will always ensure the price of commodities tend towards this centerpiece. How much industry is employed in the pursuit of a commodity is also aimed at generating just enough for the satisfaction of demand. And if you've ever worked in an oversaturated industry, then you have seen these forces in play. Or if you've worked in an industry that was underserved, like AI was recently, there will be a crap ton of money in it for everyone who gets involved, especially early on. However, as Smith notes, different industries may vary in their rate of production from year to year. Those involved in producing corn, wine, and cattle may create substantially different amounts from one year to the next. Yet a cotton mill might produce the same amount of clothing without variation. Variable industries will use their average produce as a marker to try and meet the needs of their customers, despite actual production generating more or less annually. Even though they will have steady demand, the market price of their products will be subject to greater fluctuation. Steady industries do not go through these same difficulties, and they are able to follow rising and falling demand more closely. For this reason, the cost to buy a linen cloth or a cotton shirt will not change as much as the cost to buy a cob of corn or a flank steak. Steadier industries only experience price changes when demand falls or rises, while variable industries see changes due to greater or lesser production. Smith explains which price components bears the burden of fluctuating market prices the most: wages and profit. Rents usually avoid these effects because they are set according to the average annual produce of the land. Unless there is a long-lasting change affecting the market, rental rates will hover around this amount. Abnormal fluctuations affect the value of both wages and profit more. Suppose there was a national public mourning that greatly rose the demand of black cloth, an item usually undersupplied by the market. Weavers may not experience an increase to their hourly pay, but any merchant with an abundant supply of this type of linen would see a notable improvement to their profits. When markets lack enough labor to produce a commodity, there is an effectual demand for more labor than what can be found on the market. Journeymen will find their wages boosted by this discrepancy. However, if the market is overstocked with supply and labor, merchants and workmen will see less in their pockets. Although all commodities are attracted toward their natural price point, specific accidents, market changes, or policy proposals may prop up the market price. Sometimes this effect may persist for a while. When experiencing increased demand and elevated market prices, capitalists may conceal how much they have invested in a commodity's production. Letting people know about their new investments could tempt uninterested rivals to join the industry, and in that way lower the market price. When suppliers are distant from production centers, such concealment may last for several years, allowing them to enjoy exorbitant profits for quite some time. Nevertheless, secrets are hard to keep, and rivals are bound to enter the competition eventually. According to Adam Smith, secrets are easier to keep in for manufacturers rather than tradesmen. He gives us the example of a dyer who learns of a way to create a desired pigment at half the usual price. They may be able to keep this technique away from competitors for their entire life. and even gift it to their inheritors as a legacy. Market price enhancements like this may be considered extraordinary profits, but they can persist for a substantial length of time. Some natural produce may depend on such particular soil and climate conditions that a nation may never create enough to fully satisfy the public. In these circumstances, the entire annual production may be given only to those willing to pay a premium for the product. These elevated prices could outlast whole generations and persist across centuries. Consider the land of certain French vineyards. Their costs have no relation to typical wines, and they have been expensive since antiquity. Monopolies can exert the same influence on prices as a secret does in manufacturing. Monopolists can consistently undersupply the market and sell their production at whatever price they set. Smith tells us the price of a monopoly is always the highest, which can be borne by the market, while the price of free competition is the lowest. Exclusive privileges given to corporations, apprenticeships, and laws restricting certain employments all limit competition in an industry. These situations have similarities to monopolies, though to a lesser degree. The wages of laborers and profits of capital may both be elevated by these conditions for ages, propping up entire industries. Elevations of market price may continue for prolonged periods, however lower prices may not go on for long. Any component of price paid below its natural rate would be felt by the one providing it. Whether it was depressed land rents, wages, or profits, the provider would quickly withdraw their provision, at least in a land of perfect liberty. Statutes of apprenticeship and corporate laws may also allow the elevation of wages and profit in prosperity, yet during times of hardship, these same laws may compel providers to lower their wages and profit. Regulations lowering wages seldom outlast those raising his wages. Lowered wages will decrease interest in these employments, and production will lower to meet the effectual demand. Over the next 4 chapters, Smith turns his attention to how these variations are caused and by what rules are they governed. First, he looks at the determination of wages, how richness and poverty affects them, and the advancements or decline of societies. Then he considers how we determine the rate of profit and how the state of society influences them. Third, he looks at the ratio between wages and profit and the forces governing them. Finally, he looks at the regulation of land rent and how this affects the cost of production. And that's it for chapters 6 and 7, y'all. As always, my questions for you remain the same. What are y'all doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your local communities today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part, and you can count on me to do mine daily. Till next time, God bless.